I used to think the worst thing that could happen on your wedding day was a missing ring or a bad DJ. I was wrong. The ceremony had been perfect up until that moment. The sun filtered through the tall windows of the old hall, casting warm light over the rows of smiling faces. Sarah stood across from me in her white dress, her hands trembling slightly in mine as we repeated our vows. I remember thinking that despite all the chaos it took to get here, this moment felt calm, solid, certain. Then a voice slurred loudly from the back. "I object." The room froze. At first I thought it was a joke, some poorly timed prank from a friend. But when I turned, my stomach dropped. It was my Uncle Mark, red-faced, clearly drunk. He staggered into the aisle, nearly knocking over a chair as he tried to steady himself. Mark had never liked Sarah. He'd been vocal about it from the beginning. Too vocal. So as he lurched forward, I braced myself for a humiliating rant about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I stepped forward, ready to cut him off before he embarrassed us any further. But instead of shouting accusations, he dropped, awkwardly, onto one knee. Gasps rippled through the room. He fumbled in his jacket pocket and pulled out nothing. No ring. No note. Just empty air. Then, with tears pooling in his eyes, he slurred something about how he'd loved me for years, how he couldn't let me marry the wrong person. It was surreal, mortifying, and painfully public. I rushed toward him, whispering for him to get up, trying to laugh it off for the guests. He wouldn't move. A few relatives stepped in, and within seconds it took 4 grown men to haul him out of the hall, his shoes dragging across the floor as he continued mumbling apologies and half-formed confessions. The doors slammed shut behind him. Silence. Sarah squeezed my hand harder than before, smiling tightly as if nothing had happened. We finished the ceremony on autopilot. Applause followed, but it felt thin, forced. People avoided eye contact at the reception. Conversations were short. Guests left early. Our wedding day ended not with celebration, but with confusion. For weeks afterward, we tried to pretend it was just an unfortunate incident, a drunken mistake, a bad memory we'd laugh about someday. But the mood between us had changed. Sarah grew distant, not dramatically, just enough to notice. She spent more time on her phone. She laughed less with me. When I suggested doing things we used to enjoy, she always had a reason not to. One Saturday morning, I asked if she wanted to go mini-golfing. It had been our thing before marriage. Laughing at how terrible we both were, teasing each other over missed shots. She barely looked up from her phone. "Not today," she said. I promised a friend I'd help her out. Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. I shrugged it off. Asked about the next day. She hesitated. Said she had work to catch up on. I told her it was fine. But it didn't feel fine. The excuses started stacking up. Errands. Girls' nights. Work stress. She was always somewhere else. And when she was home, she wasn't really there. A few nights later, we sat on the couch watching a movie. I was following the plot. She was glued to her phone. Suddenly, she laughed. Quietly but genuinely. I asked what was funny. "Nothing," she said too quickly. Pressed a little. She smiled at her screen, then said it was just a meme I wouldn't understand. Moments later, she said she was tired and went to bed early. I lay awake long after she fell asleep, staring at the ceiling. That same uneasy feeling from our wedding day crept back in. And for the first time since saying "I do," I wondered if my uncle's drunken interruption wasn't as meaningless as I'd convinced myself it was. That night, as Sarah's phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, I faced a choice that would change everything. Trust my wife blindly, or discover the truth I wasn't sure I was ready to see. I told myself I was being paranoid. That uneasy feeling sitting in my chest had to be stress. New marriage, leftover embarrassment from the wedding, adjusting to sharing space. People warn me marriage changed things. Maybe this was just what change felt like. Still, when Sarah fell asleep beside me that night, her breathing slow and steady, my eyes kept drifting toward the soft glow of her phone charging on the nightstand. I tried to ignore it. I stared at the ceiling, counted breaths, Told myself I trusted my wife. But trust shouldn't feel this heavy. Eventually I gave in. I moved carefully, lifting the phone as quietly as I could, half expecting her to wake up and catch me in the act. My hands were shaking, not with guilt but fear of what I might find. I unlocked it. She'd never changed her passcode. That alone hurt more than it should have. First, everything looked normal. Group chats, family messages, old photos. Then I opened her text messages, and my stomach dropped. There were several conversations with numbers that weren't saved. One thread in particular stood out. It was active, recent. Opened it. At the top it looked harmless. Memes, jokes, short videos. The kind of casual back and forth people share when they're comfortable with each other. Too comfortable. I scrolled up further. "How was your day?" the man had asked. "Long, boring," Sarah replied. "Wish I could have spent it with someone fun instead." My throat tightened. The reply came quickly. "Next time I see you, we'll skip the boring part." There was no explicit confession. No photos. No outright talk of sex. But it didn't matter. The tone was intimate. Familiar. Like two people who already shared history. Suddenly, her laughter earlier that night made sense. I locked the phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. Then I lay beside her, wide awake, my heart racing as questions piled on top of each other. Who was he? How long had this been happening? And why did it feel like my marriage was already slipping through my fingers? I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched. Over the next few weeks, I paid closer attention to everything. Late replies. Sudden errands. Her habit of angling her phone away from me. The way she'd smile at messages, then go quiet when I entered the room. I started taking screenshots whenever I could. It felt awful, like I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, but I needed clarity before accusing her of something that would shatter our lives. The nights were the hardest. Lying next to her while she slept peacefully, I replayed every conversation we'd had over the past year. Every missed weekend. Every cancelled plan. I wondered how I hadn't noticed sooner, or if I'd noticed and chosen to ignore it. One evening I decided to dig deeper. I checked her social media, her emails, old message threads. Patterns emerged. Late-night conversations. Work trips that didn't line up with receipts. Locations that didn't match the stories she told me. Each discovery felt like another crack in something I'd worked so hard to build. I reached out to a few mutual friends, careful not to reveal too much. Most said nothing unusual, until Karen hesitated. She mentioned seeing Sarah at a cafe multiple times over the past few months, always with the same man. Karen assumed he was a coworker. She hadn't thought to ask. I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling. That night, I decided to try one last thing before confronting her. I asked Sarah out to dinner. She was already dressed, black dress, heels, makeup done. Far more effort than usual for a casual night. I suggested a new Italian restaurant downtown. Her favorite food, pasta. She smiled faintly and said she'd love to, but she had something to take care of first. At 9 o'clock. Dressed like that. When I asked what kind of errand required heels and lipstick, she hesitated. Just a second too long, then said it was a girls' night she forgot to mention. That was when I knew. The truth was sitting between us, unspoken, heavy and unavoidable. I felt my chest tighten as every excuse she'd ever given replayed in my mind. And for the first time since our wedding day, I didn't just suspect betrayal. I was certain of it. But when I finally confronted Sarah that night, I never expected her reaction, or the name she would mention next. A name that would lead me straight back to the uncle who tried to stop our wedding. The words slipped out before I could stop them. "I know you're cheating on me." Sarah froze. Her hand hovered mid-air, clutching her purse strap. The color drained from her face so fast it was impossible to miss. For a moment, she just stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked, her voice too calm to be real. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I pulled out my phone and laid everything out. The screenshots, the timestamps, the inconsistencies between where she said she was and where her credit card said she'd been. Each piece landed like a quiet explosion. Her expression shifted from shock to anger. "So you went through my phone," she snapped. "You don't trust me at all, do you?" I told her trust wasn't something she could demand while lying to my face. She laughed, sharp and defensive. Said the messages were harmless. Just jokes. Just stress relief. That she hadn't actually done anything. When I asked why she felt the need to hide it, she said I was always busy, always working, never around. That stung. But it didn't excuse anything. When I told her our friends had noticed her behavior too, her confidence cracked. She demanded names. I refused. That's when she said something that stopped me cold. "Did your uncle put this idea in your head?" I stared at her, genuinely confused. "What does my uncle have to do with this?" She looked away. That hesitation, the silence, said more than any confession ever could. Pressed her. Asked her why she'd even mention him. Her hands started shaking. Tears welled up as she whispered that things were complicated. She begged me not to leave. Said she loved me. Promised she'd stop talking to everyone. Said it didn't mean anything. But the lies had stacked too high. I told her I needed space and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. That night I couldn't sleep. Her words replayed over and over, especially the part about my uncle. Didn't make sense. Unless he knew something. The next morning I called him. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped like he was carrying a weight he'd been hiding for years. I didn't ease into it. I asked him why Sarah thought he had anything to do with her affair. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. "I tried to stop your wedding for a reason." My stomach twisted. He told me he'd known about Sarah long before I did. That he'd seen messages. That someone had warned him. He said he'd confronted her privately months before the wedding. "So why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why let me marry her?" He looked at his hands, trembling. "Because she threatened me." The cafe noise faded as my heart started pounding in my ears. He explained that Sarah had found out something deeply personal about him. Something he wasn't ready to share with the family. Something that, in our conservative household, could destroy his life. She told him if he exposed her, she'd expose him. That was why he'd shown up drunk. That was why he'd objected without explaining. It was the only way he knew how to warn me without breaking her rules. Felt sick. Not just because my wife had cheated, but because she'd manipulated someone I loved to protect herself. My anger burned hot, but beneath it was something worse. Betrayal layered on top of betrayal. My uncle wasn't perfect. But in that moment, I saw how trapped he'd been. And I realized he hadn't ruined my wedding day. He tried to save me. But the secret Sarah used to control my uncle was darker than I imagined. And once I learned what it was, I knew there was no coming back from this. I stared at my uncle, waiting for him to finish his sentence. He looked around the cafe nervously, lowering his voice even though no one was paying attention to us. His hands trembled as he wrapped them around his coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "She found out about Beth," he said quietly. And blinked. "Beth, your girlfriend." He nodded. Then came the part that explained everything. Beth was transgender. My uncle rushed to explain, stumbling over his words, saying it wasn't something he was ashamed of, but something he wasn't ready to make public. Our family was traditional, deeply judgmental and unforgiving. He knew exactly how they would react. He'd already imagined the fallout. Being cut off, whispered about, erased. Sarah had found out by accident months before the wedding. And instead of keeping it private, she used it. "She told me if I said anything to you," he continued, "she'd tell everyone. Your parents. The extended family. Everyone." I felt something snap inside me. She didn't just cheat. She calculated. She trapped people. She weaponized secrets that weren't hers to use. My uncle said he'd tried to reason with her. Begged her to come clean on her own. She refused. Told him she loved the thrill of having options. Said marriage didn't mean she had to give anything up. So when the wedding day came, panic took over. He drank. Blah. He told himself if he could just delay the ceremony. 'Cause enough chaos, you might stop and ask questions. Instead, he humiliated himself and still failed to stop it. I sat back in my chair, my chest tight, my thoughts racing. Anger surged through me. Not just at Sarah, but at myself for ignoring every warning sign. For brushing off my uncle's behavior as drunken nonsense instead of desperation. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know I should have told you anyway." I believed him. That didn't erase the pain, but it reframed everything. When I left the cafe, I already knew what I had to do. The next few weeks felt like I was living someone else's life. I barely spoke to Sarah beyond surface-level exchanges. She tried to act normal, too normal. Cooking meals, making plans, laughing like nothing was wrong. Made my skin crawl. I met with a lawyer in secret. Went over timelines, finances, options. Filing for divorce felt surreal, like admitting defeat in a war I never knew I was fighting. One evening I came home early. Sarah was on the couch, scrolling on her phone like always. She looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I asked her to sit down. She sensed it immediately. Her posture stiffened. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her sweater. I placed the envelope on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked, though her voice already sounded small. "Divorce papers." Her face went pale. She stared at the documents like they were written in another language. Then she started crying, real sobs this time. She reached for my hand, pleading, promising she'd change. That she'd cut everyone off. That she loved me. I pulled my hand back. I told her this wasn't just about cheating. It was about lies. Manipulation. Blackmailing my uncle to protect herself. Using someone's identity as leverage. Her tears turned frantic. She said she was scared. That she didn't want to lose me. That she never meant for it to go this far. But it already had. I stood up and walked away while she collapsed into the couch, the papers slipping from her hands onto the floor. As I closed the door behind me, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel rage. Felt relief. I thought serving her the papers would be the hardest part, but the real challenge came afterward, when I had to rebuild myself from everything she broke. The days after I left the house blurred together. I stayed with a friend at first, sleeping on a couch that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and coffee. Every morning I woke up disoriented, reaching for a phone that wasn't buzzing anymore, listening for a voice that no longer belonged in my life. The silence was heavy, but it was also honest. Filing for divorce wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches or slammed doors. Just paperwork, signatures, and a strange numbness that settled in once the reality set in. It felt like mourning something that had already been dead long before I noticed. My uncle reached out often. At first, I didn't know how to talk to him. Part of me still hurt over the wedding day, the secrecy, the years of silence. But every time we met, I saw the guilt etched into his face. He wasn't trying to excuse what happened. He was trying to make peace with it. Slowly we rebuilt trust. I met Beth properly during that time. She was kind, soft-spoken, and painfully aware of the tension her existence had caused. She apologized for causing problems, which broke my heart, because none of this was her fault. Seeing them together made something click inside me. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me. She'd harmed innocent people without remorse. That realization helped me let go of the idea that I could have fixed things. Still, healing wasn't instant. Some nights were brutal. I'd lie awake replaying conversations, wondering how long I'd been second place in my own marriage. Other nights I felt empty, like all the emotion had drained out and left nothing behind. That's when I started therapy. At first I didn't know what to say. I felt foolish explaining how my marriage had ended before it ever truly began. But my therapist helped me untangle the mess, helped me see that trust isn't blind loyalty, and love doesn't require self-erasure. I wasn't stupid for believing her. I was human. Outside therapy, I started reclaiming pieces of myself I'd abandoned. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years. I wasn't good anymore. My hands were rusty, but the act of creating something that didn't lie to me felt grounding. I also started running. First I hated it. My lungs burned, my legs protested, and I barely made it around the block. But every step felt like proof that my body was still mine, that I could move forward even when my mind lagged behind. Weeks turned into months. The divorce finalized quietly. One day, I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours. Another day, I noticed I could hear a love song without feeling sick. Progress came in tiny, unremarkable moments, but it came. Friends started nudging me toward dating again. I resisted at first. I didn't want distractions. I didn't want to replace pain with novelty. But eventually I agreed to coffee. Then another. Most dates went nowhere. Polite conversations. Forced smiles. No spark. And that was okay. For the first time I wasn't chasing validation. I was listening to myself. Then I met Courtney. She didn't pry. Didn't rush. Didn't make me feel like my past was something to apologize for. Our first coffee stretched into dinner, then into a walk through the city, talking about everything from childhood memories to favorite books. She listened. Really listened. With her, honesty felt natural instead of risky. Just when I thought my story was finally settling into something peaceful, one last conversation would force me to confront how far I'd come, and whether I was ready to truly move on. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, through ordinary mornings, through laughter that surprises you, through moments when the past no longer has teeth. I didn't notice it happening at first. I just woke up one day and realized I wasn't bracing myself anymore. Courtney and I took things slowly. There were no dramatic declarations, no rushing toward labels, just consistency, respect, honesty that didn't require interrogation. For the first time I felt safe being fully myself. She encouraged my painting without ever pressuring me to share it. She showed up to my early morning runs with coffee, even though she hated waking up early. She remembered small details. My favorite meal, the song I always skipped, the way I needed quiet after a long day. None of it felt forced. One evening, months into our relationship, we sat on her balcony watching the city lights flicker on. The air was warm, calm. She asked me a simple question. Do you ever regret it? I knew exactly what she meant. I thought about the wedding day, the interruption, the humiliation, the marriage that never had a chance to breathe. I thought about Sarah, about how deeply I'd loved someone who never truly chose me. I regret ignoring the signs, I said slowly. But I don't regret leaving. She nodded. No judgment, no pity. Around that time, my uncle invited me over for dinner. Family dinners had always been complicated, but this one felt different. Beth was there, relaxed, laughing freely. For the first time, my uncle looked at peace. He thanked me for listening, for believing him, for not letting fear dictate my decisions the way it once had his. I realized then that the chaos of my wedding day had saved more than just me. It had forced truth into the open. I ran into Sarah once, unexpectedly, at a grocery store. She looked smaller somehow. Tired. We exchanged polite nods, nothing more. As I walked away, I felt no anger, just distance. And that's when I knew I was free. Therapy taught me something important. Love doesn't demand silence. It doesn't ask you to shrink, to doubt your instincts, or to accept half-truths in the name of peace. Real love meets you where you are, and walks beside you, not ahead or behind. Months later, Courtney and I took a short trip together. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet cabin, no cell service. Mornings filled with sunlight and coffee on the porch. One night, as we sat wrapped in blankets under the stars, she rested her head on my shoulder. I'm glad you didn't give up on love, she said softly. So was I. Because if I had, I would have missed this life. The one built on trust, clarity, and mutual choice. I would have missed becoming someone stronger. Someone who listens to his instincts instead of silencing them. My wedding day didn't mark the beginning of my marriage. It marked the beginning of my awakening. And though it started in chaos, it led me somewhere honest. Somewhere real. Sometimes the person who ruins the moment is the one trying to save your future. And sometimes losing everything is the only way to find the life you were meant to live.